Well, adding that spark to your Friday evening, Afrojack and Spree Wilson on Drive Mumbai. And a big fat hello to Arjun Kumar this evening. Chelsea fan, electronics at Solar Mobile Manipal, Solar Car Team, read his Twitter profile. Well, a bit of an eco-warrior, are you? Welcome to the show. We so want you on our side. And thanks so much for the follow. Right then, we've got company this evening. Let's get you connected. Radio 1. Well, on Drive Mumbai, we are thrilled to have best-selling author Ashwin Sanghi join us to talk about his brand new project, which is Private India, co-authored with another best-selling writer, James Patterson. Welcome to the show.
It's wonderful to be here, Erica.
You know, first as a conspiracy writer, you must have been finding parallel stories to everything around you. I mean, are you always curious and questioning, or I should say not trusting of what others might perceive to be the truth?
I suspect anyone and everyone and everything almost. Yeah. Trust me, it's not a very nice place to be.
Right.
But I think that's probably the one reason why I write the sort of fiction that I do. Because very often I see connections where none exist. It's almost like sort of playing a game of connect the dots.
Right.
And you pick up two completely unrelated events, but you see a connection. And then when you put it into the context of a fiction novel,
right,
people go, wow.
I never knew that would happen.
I never knew that was possible.
You know, as a writer of the thrilling novels that you've put out, you must get a lot of fodder from just our newspapers.
Of course. I mean, I've always believed that fact is stranger than fiction. So, I mean, all you need to do is actually just look at what's happening in the world around you. And there is just no dearth of raw material for your stories.
That's so true.
So I think, but what fascinates me always is that grey zone between fact and fiction. I've always loved fact that sounds like fiction. You know, I mean, if I have to put on a news channel, then I would love to put on one of the sensational news channels where there's a soundtrack at the back.
Okay.
You know, and on the other hand, if I have to read fiction, then I would love to read fiction that sounds like fact. Mm-hmm. So, for example, my growing up years, one of my favorite authors was Arthur Haley.
I was going to come to that,
because it was like, you know, his fiction sounded absolutely real. That space where you don't know where you're traveling from fiction to fact and fact back to fiction.
Right.
That's
the
the
grey
exciting
zone.
bit.
We're not talking 50 Shades of Grey. We're just talking the grey zone.
Absolutely.
Okay. Be right back for lots more with best-selling crime fiction author Ashwin Sanghi right here on Drive Mumbai. Just stay with us. 7 up the hits and connecting you to wonderful people in our city this Friday evening. One of them is with us, best-selling crime fiction novelist Ashwin Sanghi. He's here to talk about his new project. Let's get back to that chat. Radio 1. Were you always concocting stories and conspiracy stories in your head? Did your teacher or your parents say, listen, I just think you have a way too much fertile imagination for your own good? Did you get into trouble?
Well, you know, I think the storytelling habit to a certain extent comes from my grandfather. The old man was from Kanpur and born and brought up in Uttar Pradesh, where they have a wonderful ability to be able to make something out of nothing.
Right.
So I used to hear these incredible stories of levitating yogis.
Jeez.
And secret rituals on the banks of the Ganges. And very often I couldn't sleep at night because I was so terrified of the stories that I'd heard from him.
You know, there was a friend who came back from one of these trips, and she came to me about this story about these jinns that appear on one particular night of the year. And thousands of people gather in that village out of nowhere to watch these jinns on their horses and their flaming horses come up a cliff. And I was completely dumbfounded. And she said, listen, I saw them. So there are so many interesting stories that are waiting to be told.
You know, Erica, I've come to this conclusion. I think one of the books that really affected me profoundly was a book called An Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahans Yogananda. The one thing that book made me realize is the fact that just because you can't explain something doesn't make it any less real. If we consider the entire world to be an illusion, then what is real and what is illusory?
That's
so
true.
To that extent, I have become much more accepting of stories. Which, I mean, when my grandfather used to tell me those stories, I used to think that he was on some mind-expanding substances. But now I look at those stories and I say, well, it was possible.
Right. You know, and your fascinating first book, The Rosabelle Line, makes Jesus human after all, actually makes him superhuman because you made him survive a crucifixion and travel to Kashmir and all of that. Did you cop much flack for that?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, the way I look at it is that the moment you're writing something which is in the context of mythology or theology, where you're dealing with people's personal, their beliefs, a belief system, then I think you owe it to them to A, approach the subject with a tremendous sense of respect, and B, invest the requisite amount of time to research that subject. So as long as those two things you are very clear about as a writer, then I think it becomes very easy to even deal with the flack that may come your way.
Okay.
With the Rosabal line, I did receive flack, but I was pleasantly surprised because I received many more bouquets than brickbats.
Okay.
And that says a lot about our country in that sense.
Right.
That there is a tremendous acceptance also. What gets highlighted is the non-acceptance, but there is actually a fundamental groundswell of a willingness to question.
And we're going to be right back with lots more to stay connected. This is 94.3 Radio 1. New on our hit list, and we are loving it. Usher and Nicki Minaj there with She Came to Give It to You. Well, this is Drive Mumbai, and we got best-selling crime fiction novelist Ashwin Sanghi sharing our space tonight. Let's get him back on.
Radio 1.
Now onto a very interesting project, Private India, co-writing with James Patterson, another blockbuster novelist who sold over 300 million copies of his books. So how does that work, co-authoring a book together?
Yeah.
Who puts the words to the ideas or vice versa?
Well, it's like asking someone who composes a song that what came first, the words or the tune.
Right.
So to a certain extent, the way this worked is normally when James works with co-authors, the outline comes from James. But in this particular instance, he was very clear that India is a subject that he doesn't understand that well. And he said, listen, I would much rather that you came up with the storyline.
Oh, okay.
So the initial storyline was presented by me.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, given the fact that we were going to be two writers who were going to co-write this, the plot outline had to be very, very detailed. So normally a plot outline will not be more than around 5% of the novel length. But here it was almost about 15 or 20% of the novel length.
Okay.
Because we needed to make sure that we plot every twist, every turn, every development in that story.
That's very interesting. So how many twists and turns did it take? How long did it take?
That's
for you
the
to put it
typical
together?
Patterson formula.
Right.
That at the end of the day, build suspense wherever you can. Extend conflict wherever you can, make the characters larger than life, make their problems larger than life. I've always believed that a good book, Erica, is one where you don't turn the pages, where the pages turn themselves.
So true.
People have asked me, what does it feel like to be a best-selling writer? And the first answer that I give is that I'm not a writer, I'm a storyteller. As long as I can get you to be up at night and want to finish that book by 3 a.m., then I think I've done my job as a storyteller. I don't want to be known as a writer.
Well, stay with us. There's more to come. Let's get the hit list back on. Here we go with Chris Cab and Liar Liar. Pumping up the party sounds thanks to Rihanna there, and there'll be more of that as the evening kicks in. We're gearing you up for your Friday evening party, so do stay real close to us, 94.3 Radio 1. That said, let's get back to our guest, best-selling crime fiction novelist Ashwin Sanghi, known for his incredible talent of spinning the most outrageous yarns and conspiracies and getting us to believe them with books like The Rosabel Line, Chanakya's Chant, and The Krishna Keys, and now his new collaboration with best-selling author James Patterson. The book is titled Private India. So let's bring him back on.
Radio 1.
Okay, moving right on. If I have to give you, some situations around us, can you whip up a conspiracy for me right here, right now?
Let me try.
Okay, let's throw in Sunny Leone, because she's top of mind these days, and Mumbai Metro.
Sunny Leone, probably just maybe a CIA implant in Bollywood. I don't know.
Yeah, that could work.
Given the fact that India is supposed to be this hub of soft power, maybe that's the American way of making an inroad into Indian soft power.
Right.
The Mumbai Metro, honestly speaking, the way I see it is that the biggest conspiracy, which is yet to be revealed, is eventually as to what is going to be the price which is going to be paid by the average Mumbaiker to be able to travel in relative comfort. But having said that, when one looks at the railway budget and when one looks at the developments going on all around us, I'm wondering as to whether there is a possibility that the Mumbai Metro could be some grand scheme to be able to provide, something like a communication tunnel between Governor House and some portion of, Mantralaya. Because all of these schemes seem to be made in isolation. And you wonder as to who thought up this grand plan.
I'm fascinated by the way you think. Sunny Leone and CIA agent, that really works for me. Let's talk about the future of books, Ashwin, and the way it will be distributed and consumed. It's changed rapidly in the last couple of years itself. So, as an author with a degree from Yale in business management, what's your insight into this, into the way people are consuming books these days?
Well, I think, Erica, what has changed is the fact that I think a book is no longer a set of pieces of paper. People will consume books in very, very different ways. You could be on a train and you may have an Android device and you may decide to consume a book on that. Mm-hmm. Or you could be lying down in bed with a Kindle in your hand and you may consume your book on that. Or alternatively, you could simply be on your iPhone while traveling in the backseat of a car and you may decide to consume on that. So in other words, the platform or the device should no longer matter.
Yeah.
And that's what we are moving towards.
Yeah.
I think having said that, I want to take you to a bigger part of the story, which is that it's not just how books are consumed, but how stories are consumed. For example, looking at novels and converting them into graphic novels, converting them into comic books, converting them into video games, looking at TV serials, movies. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're consuming is a story, and it doesn't matter the format in which you consume it.
And there'll be great opportunities for you to be a better storyteller as well.
Absolutely. Think about it. In our country, we had a written script only around 300 BC, which was the Brahmi script. But we have the Vedas going back to almost about 3000 odd BC. So in other words, we had a good 2.5 or 3,000 years where stories were communicated from one person to another without a writing system in place. The truth is that we have always been a country of storytellers. We had wandering bards and we had storytellers moving from one village to another. We've got thousands of these stories which need to be retold to a new generation. So I think India is probably the one place where, in fact, this entire tradition of being able to tell a good story, to spin a good yarn, as it were,
yes,
is very much alive and kicking.
Yes, as is evident by the case before me. Be right back with lots more. Do stay connected. This is 94.3 Radio 1.
Radio 1.
And, finally, as we wrap up, useful tips to the aspiring crime fiction or conspiracy writer.
I would say more than just simply the crime writer or the conspiracy writer. First, a couple of tips just for the aspiring writer. I would say that the best-selling writers of our times are not necessarily the ones who wrote the best. They're simply the ones who were thick-skinned and very persistent. Because rejection is a part of the entire literary industry. When one door slams in your face, you need to knock on the next.
And how many times were you rejected before your first novel was published?
Between literary agents and publishers, probably in excess of 100 times.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was a lot. That's why I had to self-publish that first book.
Right.
I would say the other part of it is in terms of the question you asked in terms of crime writing and conspiracy writing. So I think invest the amount of time that is needed in terms of researching the story, in terms of plotting it, and invest the requisite amount of time in terms of editing it. Sometimes very good stories end up falling flat on their face primarily because the editor has not done a good job.